مساء الخير. مساء الخير مو إيه. أعرف الكل تعبان. أنا هيوة عثمان. شكرا لمركز الرافدين لإتاحة هاي الفرصة. أعتقد مواضيع مهمة ومهم جدا جمع سفراء دول مهمة جدا في العراق في هذا البانل في هذا الجلسة، وأتمنى أنه نطلع بنتائج أو بنقاش جيد بسبب طبيعة اللغات المحكية ومشاكل الترجمة أو المشاكل التي قد تواجه المترجمين. راح نتحدث بالبانل باللغة الإنجليزية، والترجمة ستكون إلى اللغة العربية، وبعدين إذا صار أسئلة من الجمهور الكريم ستترجم إلى السادة السفراء إلى اللغة الإنجليزية. فهذا راح يكون سياق الجلسة، وأعتذر على عدم الحديث باللغة العربية توفيراً للوقت مع السادة السفراء، وحتى يكون النقاش إلى يعني يكون نكسب الوقت بطريقة أفضل. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Very good to have the three of you, although there was Mr. Vitaly Naumkin was supposed to be here from the Russian Institute for Near East Studies, but towards the end, closer to the time of the session, he said that he has a plane to catch, and he did not. He apologized to attend. The name of the panel is the Economic and Security Perspective or View from the perspective of your countries or the union that you represent in Iraq and the challenges that lie ahead. There's always been the way of the panel will be a discussion more than speeches, so to get more time in order to use the time in a better way. Economy and security have always been the two key issues for Iraq, or the two the two pillars on which we all hoped since 2003 at least that we can create a healthy and good country. Usually good economy is followed by good security. Generally in rentier states, in oil-based economies, security tends to be volatile. A place like Iraq, next year I think the country will be 100 years old, and most of those 100 years were marred by wars, dictatorships, sanctions, international intervention, military intervention, very harsh military intervention, civil wars, corruption, ISIS, terrorism, ISIS, militias, you name it. All the bad things that you could imagine in the world has happened to this country. And in 2003, we were all faced with a place, with a destroyed state and a destroyed society. To this day, many Iraqis ask, have we managed, or are we rebuilding, have we managed to rebuild either one of the two? International community has been extremely present in Iraq, and in various ways, either through military bases, or through economic presence, but mostly it has been through security. My question that I would like to start with, starting from the most recent challenge that faced this country, and that was ISIS. We saw how a third of the country was overtaken by an extremist terrorist group. We all today or last year celebrated the victory over ISIS, but my question to the panel is that, I apologize, I have to introduce the ambassadors first. Ambassador Bruno Aubert, the Ambassador of France, Mr. Joy Hood, Chargé d'Affaires of the United States Embassy in Iraq, and Mr. Ramon Belkwa is the EU ambassador in Iraq, the European Union ambassador in Baghdad. All three of them are experts in Iraq, I think, are very good experts. And I would like to start by a question to all three of you, really. Is the threat of ISIS over? I mean, we celebrated the military victory, but is the threat of terrorism and extremism over in this country? And are we able to turn this military victory into an economic prosperity or into an economic project for the future? I'll start from the left. Ambassador Bruno.
Thank you. Of course, we know that Daesh is not fully defeated. The battle is still going on the other side of the border in Syria. And we know that there is still some concern about networks composed of remnants of Daesh in some areas of the country. So that means that we have not only to pay attention, but to continue to support Iraq in this fighting against terrorism. I would like to raise two points on that concern. If we look at over the last years, we have two main achievements. What we call now the territorial defeat of Daesh, the military defeat of Daesh in Iraq, and also a balanced regional diplomacy from part of Iraq, which is now clearly in the center of the Middle East, and who has, I would say, balanced relationships with all its neighbors. I mean, at least this is the policy. And if we go from that point on, from this achievement, I think that we have to support strongly, because one of the conditions of fighting efficiently, political-wise, against terrorism is, of course, to avoid that some neighboring countries or some other external powers, how I would say, use the territory of Iraq as a basis for their own confrontation. So this balanced regional diplomacy is helping a lot in consolidating one of the achievements of the last years, which has been the territorial defeat of Daesh. The other point is that, as I said before, we still have a strong concern about the remnants of Daesh being active in some areas of the country, and we know that these areas of the country are those liberated from Daesh. So the whole issue is to stabilize efficiently, to develop, and to make all that is necessary so that these areas don't become again the terrain for insurgency or terrorism.
Could you tell us a little bit about France, your role in helping Iraq in its fight against extremism and terrorism?
Well, as other members of the coalition, of course, we are active in counter-terrorism and sharing intelligence and supporting the capabilities, the military capabilities of the Iraqi state. So this is a shared effort within the coalition against Daesh. And within this framework, we have our own training program and to support the capabilities of the country. This is one. Secondly, we consider that stabilization is a major issue, very decisive. I mean, if we don't meet the needs of the population in these areas, if we don't take seriously the issue of social cohesion, what some of us call reconciliation, which would enable these 1.8 million people which are still in camps, the displaced person, to come back home, then we'll have a major problem in the coming years. And this is something that has to be avoided. So I think we keep having a dialogue with the government of Iraq on this issue, and we participate, of course, on the international efforts for stabilization with other bilateral and international donors.
Thank you. John?
Thank you. Yes, we do believe that Daesh is still a threat here, and that is why the United States, through our military presence and through our assistance, is doing everything we can to make sure that Iraq is capable of defending itself from those threats, whether they are internal or external. Obviously, the physical territory of the so-called caliphate will be finished probably sometime this month, inshallah. There will be no more such thing as the physical caliphate of ISIS. But that doesn't mean that they don't have sleeper cells, that they don't have people in the deserts, that they don't have financial networks. They do. They may be just as strong now as they were in 2013. So we have to remain strongly united in fighting against them. And as President Barham Saleh said yesterday, the United States military does nothing in this country without the full support and coordination of the government of Iraq. So that is our goal, is to try to make sure, in coordination with the government of Iraq, we're doing everything we can to provide the training, the equipment, the intelligence, the assistance to meet this threat and defeat it. As the ambassador said, we're working together as a coalition, not just on the military side, but on the stabilization side as well. That's why we have contributed more than $500 million to stabilization projects that bring water and electricity and rehabilitate hospitals and rehabilitate schools in the liberated areas, so people have a safe place to go home to. We need to continue working on that, because now you have a number of families still displaced who are considered to have had some sort of relationship with Daesh. We need to help them reconcile so they can go home and they don't become the next generation of threats to the sovereign government of Iraq. And then once we have met those threats, we will have established a good basis for economic development.
Mr. Ambassador Ramon, I heard you last month, or I think, or 6 weeks ago in Suleimania, saying that security in Iraq is security in Europe. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Well, I think it's very clear that the security of Europe does not start on the borders of Greece or on the borders of Spain. The security of Europe actually depends on the stability and the prosperity of our neighbors, and Iraq is in an immediate neighborhood. I think for us it has been a very clear wake-up call, the fact that Daesh is not a phenomenon that has affected just Iraq, but has been very much a European tragedy as well. We have European citizens fighting for Daesh, and we have Daesh terrorist acts in Europe. So we cannot say that whatever happens here doesn't have a direct influence on us and on our security. And the connection between the security and the economy factor is also very clear. The prosperity, the resilience of the society in Iraq, it is essential for that security that we also would like to achieve. And I would like to point something, or add something to what my colleagues mentioned, and is basically there are two elements that are beyond the mere security factor in the fight against Daesh. Is the ideology, and that ideology is still there, and their governance system. You can say that the ideology was extremist, was radical and violent, and that the system of governance was brutal. But nevertheless, it was effective, and it managed to attract a large number of people. So those are elements that cannot be just put aside or neglected, because the battles at the end, the wars at the end of the day are not won in the battlefield. They're won after. What happens after the battle is won. So, and I think ideology, like viruses, are never destroyed. It depends on the conditions in which they live. And there are 2 points that I recall from previous debates yesterday. And one is the question of demography, and the other one is the question of resources. We had discussions on water, we had discussions on demography. Those 2 factors will be as key for the future security of Iraq, and so for the future security of Europe, as you would say, the military or the security issues themselves.
Thank you. Mr. Aubert? Go back to France again. We'll do the round.
To France.
France is a famous French saying that says France doesn't have oil, it has ideas. Many of your ideas have reached Iraq over the years. I remember President Talabani in Paris when I had the honor of accompanying him as his advisor. He said, in Iraq, in the new Iraq, we are implementing liberté, égalité, fraternité, or whatever order they are. That's a correct order? That's good. French ideas have reached Iraq all along, and Iraqi people, Kurds, Arabs, and others have always been fond of your ideas. As we speak, a French school operates, 2 French schools actually operate in Iraqi Kurdistan, where my kids go to, and we're very proud of the French curriculum. The protesters in Basra were also inspired by the Yellow Vest protesters in Paris. It reaches at a governmental and a popular level. Could you tell us a bit more about your role in today's Iraq in bringing your French ideas to Iraqi society, that they don't seem to have a rejection in Iraq? A bit more. I mean, we see a vibrant civil society, we see protests, we see, in fact, we also have a Francophone Prime Minister today that you can speak to him in French directly and can speak to the French people directly. But there is a complaint that France is not doing much in terms of promoting the ideas that the French Republic stands for in Iraq, starting from supporting the civil society and issues of national reconciliation in the country. Thank you.
So, first of all, if there is a complaint, it's just because we are limited and constrained by security constraints. Otherwise, we would be much more active and much more present in different parts of the territory. Anyhow, among what we are doing, there is first all that we share with our allies in the coalition or with our European partners and some other partners. That has to do with what we were talking about before. Security, supporting the Iraqi state capabilities, developing them, etc. What we try to bring as added value as France is the following. First, we have a very ambitious plan to develop cooperation in the field of scientific research, education, university exchanges. This is an instruction from President Macron when he received Prime Minister Abadi 1.5 years ago. That was our proposal, and he endorsed it, saying you must double and even more the volume of your project, your programs, your cooperation. So this is a main axis. We believe in intellectual and cultural interaction. And we have an history with this country before. So we have to resume that again. So this is very important. There is the linguistic aspect, of course. The French language has been spoken by many Iraqis, and we have also a very ambitious plan to relaunch the French language. There is another point on which maybe the French tradition is, can bring something specific, is that we believe in the necessity to have strong institutions. We cannot envisage for those countries or anywhere in the world serious economic reform or investment from the private sector, foreign companies or local private sector, if we don't have strong institutions to regulate the market, to make the environment attractive, to give some guarantees. And the Iraqis know the price of what is a state, a solid state, because they have had the experience of a state that has been crushed. So now, clearly, Iraq is vaccinated from the temptations of hegemony, dictatorship, etc. So it's high time to, I would not say to rebuild the state, because the state is here, but maybe to reform it, to renew it, and we are ready to cooperate, and we have already made some proposals.
And last week, let's stay with France a little bit, and then we move to the United States. Your foreign minister came to Iraq last month and promised a lot of, you echoed many of what the foreign minister said. And we were all expecting President Macron in Iraq in these days or within this month, and then we heard later of either a cancellation or a delay. Could you shed a bit more light on this?
It's not a cancellation. President Macron follows closely what happens in Iraq. He has the firm intention to come, but he postponed his trip to Iraq because of the situation in France and because of the European perspective, the elections. But he should come as soon as possible this year. And this is what our Minister of Foreign Affairs said to Iraqi authorities.
Right, so we have a headline for tomorrow's papers, or for now in the social media. In terms of French investment in Iraq, apart from Total and maybe Lafarge, anyone else here, as you know of, any big investors in Iraq yet, or does anyone intend to come to Iraq, out of the big players in the French?
No, we have other investors, others than Total. Lafarge, cemeteries. You have CMA-CGM for maritime freight. You have Schneider Electric, a lot of big companies. Aéroport Paris International is interested also in rehabilitating airports. Alstom for elevated train in Baghdad or underground in Basra for the future. So big companies are present and are working on opportunities in the big potential of Iraqi reconstruction of Iraq. We are there and we are pushing for that. I should add that our Minister of Foreign Affairs decided to set up a steering committee in France, which is a French-to-French committee, aiming at mobilizing the efforts and gathering state institutions, private companies, NGOs, and dedicated on the reconstruction of Iraq. It is the only, it is the sole entity of that kind that exists in France, shared by the Minister of Foreign Affairs himself. And he shared him 3 times since last year. He decided to set up this committee at the time of the Kuwait conference for Iraq last year. So we are really committed to the reconstruction of Iraq.
Right. Can I go to the EU before America, because I'd like to leave the juicy bits to the last. The EU itself, Ramon, is an economic and a cultural union before anything else. EU's presence or contribution to Iraq has mostly been security, as you mentioned in your previous answer, either through individual member states or through NATO or through the coalition to defeat ISIS, to defeat terror. What other forms of intervention help support EU as the EU institution? I know you have some projects in the country, but they, by the scale of things, they are described as modest. But what other intervention or kind of help and support for the people of Iraq? Today, as we said, there are issues of national reconciliation, there are issues of economic diversity in Iraq. These are all issues that the European Union has a good track record in that, and it can transfer a lot of its know-how or skills to Iraq.
Well, I think the European Union has been quite at the forefront of efforts to really work on the stabilization and the reconstruction. We have co-chaired the conference in Kuwait together with the World Bank and the UN, and we have really been in the lead to really create a new narrative about what reconstruction should be. For us, reconstruction is not about just roads, just bridges, physical infrastructure, but about the human dimension. It is all about putting back together the tremendous human capital that Iraq has. And I think Iraq does not need resources. It's not about the size of the support of the grants. It is actually about how we can trigger a process of transformation that will allow Iraq to take their destiny in their own hands and to really be the ones who manage to change the economic conditions and who take a new role in the region. I think when we're talking about security, I also should have mentioned that Iraq's contribution to regional security has tremendous potential. Iraq used to be the country on which regional rivalries were fought. But Iraq can be the country in which bridges are built in the region. And I think it's showing that with the contributions for some sort of political solution in northeast Syria, the way the role is playing to diffuse tensions between Saudi Arabia and Iran, or the two opposing camps in this growing regional tension. The way it can also build bridges between Turkey and some of the Kurdish parties in Syria is also a very good example. I think there is a lot of potential because of the geopolitical position that Iraq has. So what we are trying to do is to support that capacity that Iraq has. For us, obviously, building a new security architecture in the region, it is a priority to guarantee security and stability. And for us, Iraq is a key partner. On the other hand, we also can contribute significantly through the peace and the partnership and cooperation agreement to the role Iraq can play as a communication and transport hub for trade, for investment, in many areas, and actually for natural resource management in the region. So all these elements that are central for Iraq, that are assets that Iraq has, are also projects in which the European Union contribution can be significant. So I think I wouldn't really qualify the importance of our support in the fact that we are, EU and its member states are the first donor to Iraq. But that is not really that important. I mean, even if we put 1 billion in grants, as we commit in Kuwait, that is a drop in the ocean. It's 1 day in oil income for Iraq. But that contribution if applied to critical areas, it's like antibiotics. It's small, but it can have a tremendous effect. Because the question is about increasing the efficiency and eliminating the mismanagement, the waste of resources that actually is the main problem that hampers Iraq's progress.
All of what you're saying is really good news for the people of Iraq, but we also, at the same time as we hear you, we are monitoring the rise of populist governments in Europe that they will push more for more of an exclusionist policy or a policy of detaching or distancing themselves from external affairs. How do you think the new populist-style governments of Europe, of some of the states, will deal with our issues? Will the cooperation continue, or will you build walls with us?
Well, I think the experience in Europe is that walls never stop anybody coming in. I think the French tried just before Second World War. The Romans tried in their time. Walls have never kept people out. They normally work to keep people in. So I don't think that is something that we are really looking at. It's true that there is a rise in populism. I think you have to look at it as a sign of a malaise, of discomfort, of anger. There is anger. It's true that there are growing inequalities. There is decline in social services. And that has to do somehow to the unfulfilled promises that maybe were too optimistic or too naive at the time, thinking that prosperity could be equally distributed to everybody. The reality of the new economic conditions is that the rich are getting richer, they're paying less taxes, and that creates a lot of tensions to keep the social security or the welfare system that Europe was built on. How we are going to respond to that is certainly not in my hands. I cannot give you the answers to that. The political leaders in Europe will have to address that. I know that there is growing concern, not only in the European Union, in the European Commission or the European Council, but in every European country about the effect of these movements. But I think, like the political changes that have happened in Europe show, populism is not an unavoidable fate. Populism rises because there are no convincing responses. But I think that is a challenge the political leaders will have to address.
Thank you, Mr. Hood. Iraq and America, a long story. I think it's been an ongoing story since the early 90s or the late 80s. Even before that. But effectively the past 5 presidents, Bush the first, then Clinton, then Bush, George W. Bush, then Obama, then now Mr. Trump, are all preoccupied with Iraq. Iraq is occupying a big place, I think, in their thinking and in their policy. But the question that we always ask in Iraq, is there really an Iraq strategy in the United States? I mean, these days the strategy is dictated by tweets from the Oval Office. But at the same time, I mean, people really are eager to know where are the boundaries of this strategy. Is this a place today, for example, for President Trump to invest in, or is it a place to watch others from, as he said recently? I mean, the US change that happened in Iraq in 2003 was very much welcomed by many Iraqis, despite what happened afterwards. Even yesterday, Mr. Qais al-Khazali, the leader of Asaib al-Haq, described 2003 as a injaz jameel, beautiful achievement. But today we are faced with a totally new uncertainty as to the future of this relationship. Where do we stand today in America's policy?
Thank you. I appreciate that question because it gives me an opportunity to address a lot of misperceptions and misinformation that have been out there, especially over the last several months. The strategy for Iraq from the United States has not changed from the time that we signed together the Strategic Framework Agreement. And I think it's worth taking a look at some of the exact text, which I brought with me from the agreement. What we were looking for in Section 1, what it says, what we're looking for together, is a strong Iraq capable of self-defense, which is essential for achieving stability in the region. That's number one. The temporary presence of US forces is at the request and invitation of the sovereign government of Iraq and with full respect for the sovereignty of Iraq. The United States shall not use Iraqi land, sea, or air as a launching or transit point for attacks against other countries, nor seek permanent bases or a permanent military presence. That gives you a very exact idea of what the strategy is from a security aspect.
But the president turning up at a military base without the Iraqi government knowing about it.
Sorry, what?
President Trump's turning up at a military base without the Iraqis knowing
That's
about
not true.
it. That's what and yesterday President Saleh said that he did not know anything about the tweet that he did about watching Iran.
Well, there wasn't a tweet about watching Iran either. You're making my job easy.
CBS News.
You're making my job easy.
The CBS News.
No, the visit to Ain al-Assad was notified to the Iraqi government. What the president said in his interview, you have to look at in the context of that interview. He was talking about the importance of bringing American military troops home from Afghanistan and Syria and other places after a long time in those conflicts. Because we don't want to be occupying forces. We don't want to be places for years and years, unless, like Iraq, which is what he was trying to convey in his unique way to the American people, that we want to continue making investments in Iraq because it's in our strategic interest, as we've laid out in the Strategic Framework Agreement, to have a strong, sovereign Iraqi government that's capable of defending itself. That's in our interest. And we're not fully there yet. Yes, you now control most of your territory, but as we said, there are still threats from Daesh in the deserts, in the unpopulated areas. We need to continue working together to confront those. You have threats that emerge from around the region from time to time. You have countries that seek to do things here without your permission. And that's in violation of your sovereignty. So that's what the strategy is for Iraq, so that we can get to a strong economic relationship. Right now, last year, the United States bought $11 billion of oil from Iraq, and we only sold you $1 billion worth of goods, mostly agricultural and military.
11 to 1? 11 billion?
Exactly. We'd like to see that grow in both directions because that's good for both of our countries. But not just buying oil. That doesn't employ a lot of people. We want to see private sector investments like Ambassador Aubert was talking about. Those are the investments that are going to employ thousands of people. And that's essentially what we want a good base of security for, so that we can have those good economic relations.
But from statements and tweets of President Trump, analysts are saying that America is moving from being a superpower to practically a security company for the available for the highest bidder. With all due respect to the United States of America, they have helped the Iraqi people in many important junctures, but the tweets and the statements that we've been hearing that if you're not paying, you're not getting protected. Where would that leave the SOFA for the Iraqis? The SOFA was signed by another administration.
You mean the Strategic Framework Agreement, which is not a SOFA, but the acronyms are very close.
Where would that leave? I mean, how are we supposed to...
Well, if you haven't noticed, President Trump has a unique way of communicating with the American people and with others. And so it's something that people aren't maybe used to hearing yet. But still, foreign policy is carried out in accordance with the agreements that we've made with countries, and the agreements that we have with Iraq are still there. The president can make a decision, of course, to abrogate those, to make changes, but for now, we're pursuing the same strategy that we have been for the past several years, because it's in our interests, and I think that's going to continue.
My last point is Iran. It's the elephant in the room, or the elephant in Iraq. We are all worried about potential conflict between the United States and Iran, or Iraq being used as grounds for a conflict between Iran and America. They tested you a couple of months ago by firing a missile or a few missiles on the Kurdistan Democratic Party of Iran, the Iranian Kurdish opposition party in the city of Khoisanjah. And the American response was quite shy, according to the KDPI people that said afterwards. One of their injured leading figures told me that it was more than 48 hours after the incident that not a single American official has been in touch with us yet. And they said that I think Iran sent its message to the Iraqis and to the Americans that should a conflict arise, Iran will be more superior in Iraq than America. What do you say to that?
What I say to that is we completely disagree with Iran. We don't think that Iraq should be a grounds for conflict.
But Iran does.
And we disagree. We don't want Iraq to be a grounds for conflict with anyone. And we don't want a conflict with Iran. That's why we're trying to find every way we can to encourage them to come back to the negotiating table and agree with us a long-term agreement. Maybe we can make it a treaty, but something legally binding that we can all live with, that will govern our relations for many years. And that would involve not undertaking destabilizing activities in other people's countries, such as launching missiles at will without coordination, and a lot of other things that they're involved in other countries with ballistic missiles, with economic activities, supporting armed groups without regard to the sovereign governments in those countries. And that's what we're trying to avoid here. We want to have a strong, sovereign Iraq capable of defending itself so that no neighbor, no world power is able to do things in Iraq without the full support and coordination of the Iraqi government.
On that note, I'll have to leave it here. Thank you so much. شكرا جزيلا لإصغائكم.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassadors. I think it was, we have how many? We have 10 minutes for questions. عندنا 10 دقائق لأسئلة. أرجو أن تكون الأسئلة مختصرة وأسئلة فقط. عندنا 10 دقائق لنستغل الوقت بشكل جيد. نأخذ من الصف الأستاذ بديع. تفضل. أستاذ بليغ. مايكروفون يا شباب للأستاذ بليغ. أكو مايكروفون لو ياخذ هذا. خلصت ال10 دقائق.
سؤالي إلى سعادة نائب السفير الأمريكي. حقيقة من الجيد أن عندما يجيبني أن يعني يقتبس مرة ثانية الاتفاقية الاستراتيجية. في بدايتها قال نريد عراق قوي، والعراق لا يستخدم كأرض للهجوم على أحد. هل يعتبر يعني لو كانت هناك قاعدة للجمهورية الإسلامية في العراق وتحدث الرئيس روحاني وقال أننا نريد أن نراقب الولايات المتحدة من هذه القاعدة، هل كان هذا تصرفا يؤدي إلى قوة العراق أم يحرج العراق ويحرج حلفائكم وفق هذه السياسة الاستراتيجية؟ لو كان الأمر معكوسا هل كنتم ستقبلون تصريحا من الرئيس روحاني بهذه الطريقة؟
Shall I answer or
Please.
Okay. Well, thank you for the question. As I said before, we are trying to contribute to a strong, sovereign Iraqi government that's able to make decisions over all of its territory of what happens to all the people in its territory. So if the sovereign government of Iraq would like to allow another country to have a base in its country, that's up to the government of Iraq. What I know is that we do not have any American bases in this country. American military forces operate jointly on Iraqi bases in cooperation with our coalition partners and with the Iraqi security forces every day. And that's the only way we operate.
Thank you. أقرب شخص للميكروفون تفضل أستاذ. يا ريت لو تعرف نفسك وحتى.
We have one question to the EU ambassador. You have any special strategy to the EU Commission about the security of Iraq different about USA? Seem the different about the strategy between the Iran and America and EU and America. You have some strategy special about EU, and what do you think about in the future if you have different about your strategy and between you and USA? What you choose, your strategy or American strategy? This is big questions, and I'd like to answer the answer very clean about it, because this is special about the Iraqi people. He understood what is happening between EU and USA. Thank you.
Well, I think I can give you a very clear answer. The EU has a Iraq strategy, and that is something that we even presented jointly with the government of Iraq last year in January. It's been approved by the 28 member states, so it's not just for the EU institutions. It's something shared by the 28 member states as well. And that strategy certainly has a strong security component. We are supporting the national security strategy of the government of Iraq by the deployment of an advisory mission that is here in the country already for over a year, that is being strengthened and extended at the request of the Iraqi government. And this is not to promote a European model for Iraqi security. It's basically to give advice and share best practices so that Iraq can make that transition from a security designed to confront a terrorist threat and fight a war to a security based on responding to the concerns of its citizens and increase government control over all armed groups and all the different security actors in the country. We also support, and we have a strategy, as I mentioned before, to support Iraq as a constructive and positive influence on regional security and stability. And there is a clear convergence and agreement between our position on regional issues and Iraq government's position. On the question, and you were asking, so when there is conflict between US strategy or US-EU relations and regional strategies, well, you have the example with the JCPOA, the famous nuclear deal, in which, well, we regret that our American allies have withdrawn from the treaty. We believe that that treaty that my colleague was mentioning already exists, and is something we have to build on, improve and develop. But that treaty, for us, for the European Union and the 3 European countries that have been participating in the whole negotiation, is a good base on which to work to improve regional security, prevent nuclear proliferation. So we have made our position clear. We disagree with the unilateral sanctions that the US government has imposed as well. And we abide by the terms of the agreement. That is not an agreement between just 2 countries or between even 5 countries and Iran. It's an agreement endorsed by the UN Security Council and endorsed by a resolution of the UN Security Council. So, and is being actually monitored by the UN agency for nuclear security, the IAEA. So I think it's very clear. We have a set of principles. The European Union has very clear strategy in which Iraq is concerned. We have also a global strategy that I will advise you to really consult, because it's quite a good document. I will not promote you to, I will not advise you to read a lot of EU documents, because they tend to be long and quite boring, to be honest. But this particular document, I think, is extremely clear and very, I think, targeted. It really tells you what the European Union sees as its role in the international field, and it's basically that the world is going to be threatened by more protracted and complex conflicts. So the European Union is creating and developing instruments to be more effective in crisis management and conflict resolutions, both with in security-oriented instruments, as well as development and long-term instruments to address the root causes of conflict. Thank you. Sorry for the long
answer.
answer.
One last question. I think we have to wrap. السؤال الأخير، الوقت داهمنا، ما راح أسوي مثل عماد. أخذ وقت أكثر.
Thanks for the distinguished ambassadors, members of the panel. My simple question to Ambassador representative of the EU: how do you assess the agreement between Iraq and the EU, which is very long and, as you said, tiring for reading? My second question for the Excellency, the Ambassador, the Deputy Ambassador of the USA. I'm pleased to hear the quotation from the Strategic Framework Agreement and the articles you quoted. And from this, I could say that on both sides, on the level of your administration and our government, on the high-level leaders, that we must be careful in order to further the bilateral relations, to deepen them, to avoid as much as possible as we could, not to poison the 2 bilateral relations between us. We know what is, I am following myself, what's happening in Washington, D.C. And there is a phenomenon which is unprecedented there. But at least on bilateral levels, both of us should work hard to promote the bilateral relations and to avoid these sort of statement that doesn't contribute to the constructive and to get this from, as you said, support and cooperation into more detailed type of relationship. Thank you.
أعتقد السيد سفير الاتحاد الأوروبي جاوب على سؤالك بالجواب السابق، فلهذا أعطي الجواب فقط لسعادة نائب السفير. I think you answered his first question in your previous answer somehow in a different way. So we'll give Mr. I'll take one last question. أخذ سؤال أخير يفضل لسعادة السفير الفرنسي إذا أمكن حتى يكون هناك عدالة في توزيع الأجوبة. للسيد السفير الفرنسي سؤال؟ تفضل. ما عندكم طلاب احنا بكردستان ممنونين للفرنسيين فيعني.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بروفيسور هيثم بالاقتصاد العراقي. سؤالي السفير هو ما هي جهود فرنسا والاتحاد الأوروبي في جدول الديون العراق الخارجية، لا سيما أن ديون العراق تبلغ 130 مليار دولار. والثاني ما هي جهود كذلك الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية والاتحاد الأوروبي وفرنسا في إعادة شروط صندوق النقد الدولي حول القروض، حيث أن معظم القروض صندوق النقد الدولي للعراق هي قروض نحو الإنفاق الجاري وليس الاستثماري. وشكرا جزيلا.
Sir, you just take the answer. If you would like to answer the first question and the yes, please.
Well, the partnership and cooperation agreement is actually a very wide framework in which you have a lot of different choices. It's like a very long menu from which Iraq and the European Union will have to choose their priorities. I think this is not going to be a partnership based on assistance. It's going to be a partnership based on really mutually developed strategies. And Iraq has a lot to get from this agreement if they know how to choose. For example, you have wide global projects like Horizon 2020 is $80 billion to support research. Any Iraqi researcher can apply and can participate in this program. You have programs on many, many different areas, in investment, in trade, in research, in environmental issues. Whatever you want to really develop, you can find there. The PCA is just a framework, just a channel. So you have to look at the menu, choose what you really want, and then you have to really prepare, request, negotiate, engage, and that will be the way in which Iraq can get special preference in trade, develop agricultural exports, or develop their industrial base. That is what the European Union offers as a trade, as an economic bloc, and as a space for I think one of the largest spaces for international and interstate cooperation.
Thank you, Ron. Ambassador Joy? To Bruno. Yeah, working.
Concerning the rescheduling of the debt, well, I've been in this country for 1 year and a half, and I must admit that this issue has never been on the agenda of our dialogue. So the debt was rescheduled. I mean, one decade ago in the Club de Paris, under the authority of the current Prime Minister, Mr. Abdelmadi, when he was Minister of Economy at that time, I think. So what France is doing now, we don't want Iraq to be indebted, and we have appreciated the policy of adjustment that has been carried out over the last 2 years. But still, given the huge needs for Iraq reconstruction, we are ready to participate and to help Iraq. So in 2017, we offered a budget loan of 430 million euros. And this year, our Minister of Foreign Affairs, 3 weeks ago here in Baghdad, announced a financial facility of 1 billion euro, which is a mix of sovereign loans from the Treasury, project-directed loans from the AFD, Agence Française de Développement, which is our development agency, which is a development bank as well, and some credit insurance as well. So this is our financial contribution, in addition to our participation to the stabilization efforts, of course.
Thank you so much. Joe, would you like to say final?
Sure. Thank you. I think with regard to the IMF, the United States is obviously a major component of the IMF. We helped also guarantee a bond issuance by the Iraqi government a couple of years ago when you were in a real crisis. But our goal is to try to help you avoid crises. That's why we have advisors at the Ministry of Finance. That's why we're pushing private sector reforms so that you can get a lot more tax revenue and you can manage your budget in a much more effective way so that you don't need loans from the IMF or from anyone else. But a final word to our colleague who was talking about the bilateral relationship. I think now, 16 years on from 2003, the beautiful achievement to which we owe a lot of debt to Americans and our coalition partners and brave Iraqis who gave their lives for this. I think that our relationship has matured. I think we're capable of saying things to each other in public, in private, testing new ideas, and then responding to them. I think we shouldn't always take life quite so seriously. Thank you.
شكرا جزيلا. شكرا سعادة السفراء لهذا الحديث الشيق برأيي. أعتقد عند الصحفيين الكثير من الأخبار. Our journalists, I think, will have some juicy material from what you said, all of you. شكرا جزيلا لإصغائكم ونتمنى أنه نراكم في الجلسة القادمة. شكرا لكم.